Let's talk about resentment. Resentment is a brutal presence in your life. It is like poison that will eat you from the inside out if you let it. It is so important to develop the capacity to be able to recognize it and address it in a healthy way when it arises within you. In this video, we're going to talk about why it's so terrible for you and why it's so important that you address it. We're going to talk about why it exists in the first place. And we're also going to talk about the solution, what you can do about resentment, how you can rid yourself of it in a healthy way. So you probably have an idea of what resentment is, but just a quick definition before we dive in. Resentment is a sort of bitter indignation. It is anger or annoyance that has this bitter quality to it that is provoked by someone in some way. So why is it important that we address resentment? Why can't we just let it exist? I mean, you can, but if you do that, go ahead and see how that works out for you. You're probably going to be a pretty miserable individual with no capacity to maintain and sustain healthy relationships. Resentment left untreated is just going to occupy your mind with that bitter anger and annoyance that I stated previously, and just leaving you feeling overwhelmed by this sort of negativity, this hateful energy. Sometimes it can even get rageful. And letting those emotions go unchecked not only leads you to this chronic miserableness, but it also has poor physical health implications. There's a good chance that to a certain degree, your stress hormones will be chronically elevated, and that's going to increase your risks of cardiovascular disease and really all-cause mortality. You can look into research on that. Stress is a terrible thing for your physical health. If you think that your physical health and your mental health don't have a direct link, well, think again, because it is very, very grounded and accurate. We have the research now to know that that is the cold, hard truth. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So not only is it going to be terrible for your mental and physical health, but it's also going to be terrible for your relationships, as I mentioned before. Because resentment is grown relative to another person, right? You feel resentment relative to someone else. It is a relationship killer. Oftentimes, you might not be able to help the fact that resentment can grow between you and the people that you love dearly. And if you let it grow and let it fester, it is going to pull you apart and be this terrible presence between the two of you. And then one day, in the worst case scenario, you're not going to want anything to do with that person. They're not going to want anything to do with you. And this might actually become a theme in many of the valuable relationships in your life. And then that misery is going to turn into loneliness as well, which is just going to have a compounding effect on the rest of these negative emotions that you're feeling. So you don't want to be like Ebenezer Scrooge, right? Just like bitter and alone. I don't know where the greed fits into this. I know that was another thing that he had, but you get the archetype here that the picture that I'm trying to paint, right? You don't want to be old and alone and bitter at the end of your life. You want to be able to develop this skill of recognizing resentment when it's there so you can address it. Okay, so that's why it's so crucial to not let it fester. Now let's talk about why it exists in the first place. So you can just take some time right now, do a little exercise, and you probably already know who you might have some resentment towards if you're watching this video, but you would be surprised if you really do like a reflection exercise here and think about it. There might be a little bit of resentment starting to grow in more places than you realized. So you can go ahead and take some time to reflect on where you might have some relationships that feelings of anger, bitterness, annoyance, resentment are starting to grow. You can go ahead, pause the video and do that. And then if you have a little list, you can come back to it. Okay, so now you know where some resentment may be lying. Maybe some of the relationships that you wrote down on your list here were very obvious, and maybe some of them weren't so obvious, and you surprised yourself and recognized, I actually do feel a little bit of resentment towards this person and that person that you didn't previously recognize. So now we're going to talk about why that resentment might exist. You know that it's there, but maybe you're not completely sure why. So the first reason that resentment might exist is a perceived injustice or unfairness. So perhaps you feel like you've been treated unfairly by this person. Maybe they've just been a little bit emotionally immature towards you, or they've been rather rude, or you feel as though they're not showing up in the relationship as much as you are, whether it's romantic or platonic, just a friendship. That's one reason. And that's a very general description. There can be so many reasons why you feel there is an injustice or unfairness going on. Another reason is unmet expectations. So you've either communicated expectations to someone and they haven't been met, or you haven't communicated the expectations towards this person. You've just kind of thought about them in your mind and they haven't upheld what you expected of them. Okay, so both of those can exist. We'll talk about those again later on. Lack of recognition or appreciation. This could be another reason for resentment. You don't feel appreciated by someone. You don't feel that they recognize what you've done for them. Betrayal or broken trust. You feel as though somebody has broken your trust or betrayed you. There's an infinite number of reasons why you might feel that way. Unresolved conflict. Perhaps you haven't been able to see eye to eye on a conflict that's come between you, and you don't really feel any sort of resolve relative to that conflict. So these are all some fairly grounded reasons why you might feel resentment towards someone. And that doesn't mean that you are exempt from the responsibility of dealing with that resentment and addressing it. But it's rather easy to understand why you might feel resentment towards someone for any of those reasons that I just mentioned. Now we're going to talk about another category of resentment. Okay, so we'll call that grounded resentment. The next category of why you might feel resentment towards someone, we're going to call it envious resentment. And that's pretty self-explanatory. There's a few different reasons why you might feel resentment towards someone under this category, and that is power imbalances. So you resent someone who is perhaps above you in some sort of hierarchical structure that you're in, be it the workplace or maybe just in the economy in general. Somebody's more wealthy than you and you resent them for that reason. Competition and comparison. This also directly relates to power imbalances, but not exclusively, right? You might be comparing yourself to someone in something and resent them because they are progressing faster than you at this skill that you're learning together, just as an example. And then any other type of jealousy or envy that might not fit those first two categories can also be a reason for resentment, and it also falls under this envious resentment category. Those are pretty well all the reasons that you might resent someone. If you think I missed a general category of why you might resent someone, let me know in the comments down below. But I think that does a good job of summarizing pretty well any and all reasons why you might be resentful towards someone. So now let's talk about what you can do about it. All right, we broke down the reasons for resentment into two different categories, right? We said there's a grounded resentment, although that doesn't dismiss your responsibility to deal with it. And there's this envious resentment. And a distinction there is also that it's a little bit less grounded, right? The other person doesn't have as much to do with the resentment. It's mostly just coming from you. It's coming from your own insecurities, right? Those feelings of jealousy and envy don't have anything to do with the other person. It's mostly about you. So firstly, let's address resentment that falls under that category of envious resentment. Well, I want you to reflect specifically on why you are resenting that person, what it is that you're envious of, what it is that you're jealous of. And then recognize that that just comes from your own insecurities. That has more to do with you than it does to do with them. It really doesn't have anything to do with them. It's just the way that you are relating to that person in your own mind. You're comparing yourself to them in some sort of way. And I want you to really let that sink in, that that is the truth in these circumstances. In those circumstances of resentment, it is about your own feelings. It's about your own insecurities, your own feelings of shortcoming. So that newfound awareness is going to let you drop the other person in this equation of how to solve this resentment. So that is sort of to say that you've already gotten halfway there of solving it. Try to ground yourself into the fact that it has nothing to do with them. You can release all these negative feelings that are connected to them now and recognize that it's just about the insecurities that you have. And now address those insecurities. Perhaps the insecurities are relatively grounded. Maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck. Well, the way you handle that insecurity is by accumulating more wealth, right? It has nothing to do with the other person. It's about your own struggles in this situation. In those situations where resentment is just grounded in envy rather than anything that the other person is actually doing that is unjust towards you. So if that's what your resentment was grounded in, now you just solved one problem and you kind of traded it in for another. Hopefully you're no longer resentful, and now you just have this problem of solving these insecurities. And to paraphrase from Mark Manson, life is just about trading in one problem for a better problem. And this is a much better problem to have. Solving these insecurities is now at the root of those emotions that you were feeling, and now you're not feeling angry, bitter, and resentful towards another. You've recognized that it's just about your inner world here. It's just about your own insecurities. And now you can start to develop different skills to solve those insecurities. Okay, now let's address the other side of this. This is most likely going to be where most resentment comes from, okay? Most resentment is going to be from one of the reasons under the grounded resentment list that we went over before. So perceived injustices or unfairness, unmet expectations, lack of recognition or appreciation, betrayal or broken trust, and unresolved conflict. Okay, so most of these resentments, I'm willing to bet, are going to be for one of those reasons that I just mentioned. So how do we solve those? The first step is giving yourself a detailed explanation of exactly what the resentment is about. Once you do that, you have this sort of map that you can use to navigate a conversation with this person that you're feeling resentful towards. You can communicate to them, hey, I'm feeling betrayed for these reasons. I'm feeling that you broke my trust for X, Y, and Z. I'm feeling that our relationship has been a little bit unfair or unjust for these reasons. I'm feeling like I want some resolve in this conflict that we've been experiencing. Let's try to have a conversation and find some resolve there. Now, a word of caution. I'm hoping for your sake that this person that you're trying to solve the resentment towards has a good degree of emotional intelligence to them and they won't get defensive. But reality has dictated to me that most people are lacking at least a little bit in the emotional intelligence department. So you have to be rather surgical with your approach here to try to sidestep those feelings of defensiveness that will really just like throw a wrench in this whole process. Here's my take on how to do that. When you approach this person to try to communicate and resolve these feelings of resentment that you're feeling, explain to them before you bring up any ways that they've maybe broken your trust or that you feel they've been unfair or unjust towards you. Explain to them that you are coming to them to have this conversation because you value the friendship, you value the relationship. You don't want to harbor any feelings of resentment. You don't want anything to come between you two. So you want to be completely honest and leave it all up in the air and try to solve this problem and communicate with them. If you approach it this way, there's going to be a much higher likelihood that they will receive it well. Rather than if you just approach them and say, hey, I feel like you betrayed me and broke my trust for XYZ. So you have to approach this with a high degree of emotional intelligence. Come to them as a friend. Come to them grounded in the awareness that you value the relationship, and that's why you want to resolve this resentment that you're feeling towards them. Okay? Then have a emotionally intelligent conversation with them. Make sure you are checking your own bias as well. Maybe you come to them with these reasons that you feel they've broken your trust, that they've been behaving unjustly towards you, and they think about it, and then they come back to you with reasons why they feel that's not the case. And maybe they have a good point. Maybe you just learned something new, and maybe you recognize, okay, I can see where maybe I've been treating you a little bit unfairly as well. Or I can see why you'd feel that that wasn't unfair, the way that you were behaving, or why you feel that that didn't break my trust. Oh, you're right. We did have that conversation first. I sort of forgot about that. Make sure you are approaching the situation mentally from outside of yourself as best as you can. Try not to get lost in your own bias. Make sure you are not getting overly emotional and defensive as best as you can. Again, emotional intelligence is a whole other skill here. This skill that we're developing is part of emotional intelligence, but just overall mindfulness is very important too. Recognize when you're getting emotional, maybe a little bit frustrated, flustered, and try to reground yourself into the conversation. And if you're able to do that, hopefully this is going to work out well for you and you can find some resolve with the resentment that you've been feeling. Now, talk is cheap. If you have a conversation with someone and they say, yeah, you're right, I'm going to change in ways X, Y, and Z, and then there's kind of like repeated offenses. They break your trust a few times or they still behave in this like unjust, unfair way. Well, it gets to a point where sometimes you got to lose some friends. Sometimes you have to change the dynamics of the relationship. Maybe you're not going to lose that friend, but you're just going to create some space with them. Instead of them being your best friends, they're going to be somebody that, you see every now and again and you do some hobbies with them or something. That's up for you to decide. I think it's important to have healthy boundaries. If you're going to take the time to communicate these feelings to someone and they're still going to kind of betray those boundaries that you've just made, I think it's worth contemplating what changes need to be made in the closeness of that friendship. I've had a lot of friends that I'm just no longer friends with because, they're not able to have these conversations. They get really defensive, aren't able to see anything from outside of themselves, and I recognize that's not somebody that I want to be friends with. So, again, up to you. The ball is fully in your court on that one. There's no hard and fast rules to life. This is a DIY project, and like I said, it's all up to you how you want to navigate from there. But that's just a little bit of my thoughts on how I choose to do things anyways. So I hope this video was helpful, guys. I hope this helps you navigate any resentment that you've been feeling towards someone. I hope you find some resolve and are able to rekindle and potentially even save any relationships that you have that have been going through some tension, some resentment. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to my channel for more helpful content like this, and let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. I'll see you in the next one.